shift at the abandoned motel. A true scary story. Introduction. On a cold autumn night, Arman, who had just started his new job as the night security guard at a small motel on the outskirts of town, was preparing for what he thought would be an uneventful shift. The motel had been in decline for years, with only a few travelers stopping by for a night stay. His job seemed simple: monitoring security cameras, checking empty rooms, and logging any unusual activity. But no one had told him about the motel's dark past. Strange happenings begin. It was 2:30 a.m., and Arman, bored out of his mind, sat in the security office sipping a cup of hot tea. He scanned the security monitors, watching the empty hallways in the dimly lit lobby. Everything seemed normal until something caught his attention. Camera 3, which showed a view of the main hallway, kept glitching. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, but then he saw something that made his skin crawl. A woman in a white dress stood at the end of the hallway. Arman blinked and rubbed his eyes, but when he looked again, she was gone. Confused and slightly uneasy, he grabbed his flashlight and decided to check the hallway. But when he reached the same spot, there was nothing. Just an eerie silence and an unnatural chill in the air. Room 107. As he turned back toward the security office, he heard a faint knocking sound coming from one of the rooms. Room 107. That was odd. He was sure that room had been locked and unoccupied. With growing unease, he approached the door and pressed his ear against it. A faint whispering sound was coming from inside. With trembling hands, he fumbled with his keys and slowly unlocked the door. When he stepped inside, the room was completely empty, except for one thing: a wooden chair placed in the center of the room, as if someone invisible was sitting on it. The mysterious phone call. Feeling his chest tighten with fear, Arman quickly left the room and locked it behind him. He decided to call the motel manager, but just as he picked up the phone, the motel's landline suddenly started ringing. No one should be calling at this hour. With hesitation, he answered. A woman's voice whispered on the other end, "Why did you open my door?" Arman's blood ran cold. He immediately hung up and checked the security monitors again. The woman in white was back, this time standing right outside the security office, fleeing the motel. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He grabbed his keys and rushed toward the exit. But before he could reach the door, the lights flickered violently. A slow, dragging sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Just as he flung the door open and ran outside, he felt a presence behind him, but he didn't dare turn around. The only thing he remembered before driving away was looking at the security monitor one last time. The woman in white was standing at the entrance, staring right at him. The truth is revealed. The next morning, Arman quit his job, refusing to ever return to the motel. Later, he discovered that years ago, a woman who frequently stayed at the motel had committed suicide in room 107, sitting on that very same wooden chair. Since then, every night security guard had reported strange occurrences, but no one had ever warned the new hires. Was this just a trick of the mind, or was the spirit of the woman still wandering the dark halls of the motel? Night shift at the abandoned hospital. A true scary story. Introduction. In 2012, Saeed, a young nurse, had just started working the night shift at an old rundown hospital on the outskirts of the city. The hospital had been partially shut down due to budget cuts, and only one floor remained operational with a few patients. But the fourth floor? No one ever went there. On one of his first night shifts, Saeed began noticing things that he couldn't explain. The strange call night shifts were usually quiet. Most patients were asleep, and only a few nurses were on duty. That night, at 2:45 a.m., Saeed was sitting at the nurse's station, writing his reports when he heard a call bell ringing. Room 407. He checked the patient list, but there was a problem. There was no patient in that room. Confused and a little nervous, he got up and walked toward room 407. The hospital hallway was dimly lit, casting long shadows on the walls. With hesitation, he placed his hand on the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark, but suddenly he heard a faint whisper from inside. His heart pounded. He turned on his flashlight and scanned the room, but it was completely empty. The only thing out of place was a single chair in the middle of the room, slightly pulled out, as if someone had just been sitting there. Chills ran down his spine. He stepped back and quickly shut the door. But just as he turned away, he heard a soft voice from behind the door. "Help me." The shadow in the hallway. Saeed hurried back to the nurse's station, his breath unsteady. One of his colleagues noticed his fear and asked what was wrong. When he told her about room 407, her face went pale. "Never go to the 4th floor," she whispered. "Years ago, a patient in room 407 was forgotten by the staff. He passed away alone in the dark. Since then, the call bell sometimes rings at night, even though the room is empty." A wave of dread washed over Saeed, but the worst was yet to come. A few hours later, as he tried to shake off the fear, he glanced at the hospital's security monitors. One of the cameras showed the 4th floor hallway. What he saw made his blood run cold. A dark figure stood right outside room 407, and then it moved, turning its head slowly toward the camera. Cold hands on his shoulders. Saeed had had enough. He grabbed his things, ready to leave the hospital immediately. But just as he reached for the door to exit the nurse's station, he felt something behind him. The air became thick, suffocating. Then suddenly, 2 cold hands rested lightly on his shoulders. He let out a strangled gasp and spun around, but no one was there. Yet when he looked down at his uniform, he saw it. 2 faint white handprints, slowly fading away. The truth is revealed. The next morning, Saeed quit his job and never returned. Later, he discovered that he wasn't the only one who had experienced these terrifying events. Several night shift nurses had reported hearing whispers, seeing doors open on their own, and witnessing shadowy figures moving in the hallways. Some even said that the hospital had been built over an old graveyard, and the spirits of the forgotten still wandered its halls. But was it just a legend, or was something truly lurking in the darkness of the night? Night shift at the gas station. A true scary story. Introduction. In 2015, Mark Lewis, a 27-year-old college dropout, started working the night shift at a small gas station on the edge of town. The station was open 24 hours, but barely anyone came by after midnight. Mark thought the job would be easy, just sit behind the counter, drink coffee, and scroll through his phone until sunrise. But what no one told him was that this gas station had a dark history, and some customers never really left. The first sign. It was around 2 a.m. on his 3rd night when Mark first noticed something strange. He was sitting behind the counter, watching the empty parking lot through the glass window. The station was completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the flickering neon sign outside. Suddenly, the automatic door slid open by itself. Mark glanced up, expecting to see a customer, but no one was there. He got up, walked to the door, and looked outside. Nothing but darkness and the cold night air. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just a malfunction. But something about the way the door opened, so slowly and quietly, made his skin crawl. The man in the parking lot. An hour later, as Mark was cleaning the coffee machine, he glanced at the CCTV monitors behind the counter. The cameras covered the parking lot, the aisles, and the storage room. On camera 3, which showed the back parking lot, he saw something that made his heart stop. A man standing completely still at the edge of the gas station lights, just far enough to be hidden in the shadows. The man wasn't moving. He was just standing there, facing the building. Mark grabbed the microphone connected to the station's outdoor speakers. "Hey, we're closed for maintenance." No reaction. The man just stood there. The phone call. Mark was trying to ignore the figure when the station's landline phone rang. He jumped. The phone almost never rang during the night shift. He picked it up with a shaking hand. "Hello?" For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Don't let him in." Mark froze. "What? Who is this?" But the line went dead. The storage room. He hung up and checked the cameras again. The man was gone. Mark felt a wave of relief until he noticed something on camera 4, which showed the hallway leading to the storage room in the back. The storage room door was slightly open. Mark was sure he had locked it at the start of his shift. He grabbed a flashlight and a metal crowbar from under the counter, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. As he walked down the hallway, the air grew colder. His footsteps echoed against the tiled floor. When he reached the storage room, he pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty. But on the dusty floor, there were wet footprints leading from the back door to the shelves, as if someone had been standing there, watching him the whole time. The whispering woman Mark slammed the door shut and locked it, his heart pounding. He ran back to the counter and checked the cameras again. That's when he saw her. On camera 2, which showed the front aisle of the station, there was a woman standing between the shelves, wearing a long white dress, her face completely hidden by her hair. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He looked up at the actual aisle, but no one was there. When he looked back at the screen, she was staring directly into the camera. The last hour. For the next hour, Mark sat frozen behind the counter, gripping the crowbar tightly. The cameras kept glitching. The automatic door opened and closed on its own. He heard footsteps in the aisles, slow, deliberate footsteps, but every time he checked, the station was empty. At 5:45 a.m., just before sunrise, everything suddenly stopped. The cameras stopped glitching. The door stayed shut. The footsteps disappeared. When the morning shift worker arrived at 6 a.m., Mark quit on the spot. The truth. A few months later, Mark found out the truth. 10 years earlier, a woman had been murdered behind the gas station by her abusive husband. Witnesses claimed she had tried to run inside the station to ask for help, but the night clerk locked the doors and refused to let her in. Her body was found the next morning, right outside the front door. Ever since then, strange things happened during the night shift. Employees would hear footsteps, see figures on the cameras, and receive strange phone calls from disconnected lines. Some say the woman is still trying to find someone who will let her in,